Okay, 5 o'clock on the dot. Let's get started. A lot of information to go through. First, I'd like to thank all of you for coming and attending this talk. I'm sure you can gather from the title, from the brochure, that we're going to be discussing printers. And it actually is going to be quite entertaining if you haven't dealt with these devices before. So again, thank you guys for coming. Also, I'd like to thank my beautiful and amazing wife, who's here in attendance, for putting up with me and my job. I don't know if there's a lot of pen testers out there that have to travel a lot or work the scoping hours where you're up all night and then have to try to get the kids in the morning and still try to function during the day. So thank you very much to my beautiful wife, Carmen. So, into the talk. We are going to be going on a printer safari, tracking down these Zebra printers and demonstrating all the issues that are associated with this device. So I feel it's that bad. Just to go in a little bit about my background, I work for this company called Experis. I'd like to thank them for allowing me to come and do this talk, putting me up in a decent hotel and paying for my travel. I definitely appreciate that. They're just a division of Manpower. They had purchased Jefferson Wells a number of years ago, folded them in, added some IT security, and I'm part of a small team that does penetration tests, sometimes red team, sometimes audit. I've been with them for a number of years. 17 years already in information technology for me. I can't believe it. And 14 of that actually in information security. 11 of that in actual pen tests, with a stint in the middle 3 years where I was an analyst and wasted my life. So enough about me, because there's a lot of information to go over with regard to these printers. So a little bit of a background. Well, first off, why? Why look at printers? And then we'll go into a little bit of detail of why Zebra printers in general. Just a show of hands from the crowd. Are you guys familiar? Anybody know what these printers are? Have seen them before? Excellent. I love it. Look at all those hands. Yes. Most in your daily lives, especially even just all of you traveling here, when you leave, your receipt will be printed from the rental car company from a Zebra printer. I can guarantee that. So I'll go into an overview of Zebra printers, and then we'll take a look at the Zebra printers in the wild. I can tell from the show of hands that a lot of you may already be familiar with that, so that's good. Go into detail about the network-based attacks on these devices and physical security attacks centered around that. And then I'll wrap it up with some things that I want to do in the future with continued research with these devices, because in the era of IoT, from a corporate level perspective, once, if ever, environments button up their servers and workstation environment, we may only be turning to printers to gain a leverage into the network environment. So I got some wishes for continued research. And then at the end, this talk will take all the way up to the end, but if there's any questions, hopefully we'll have enough time at the end. If not, just come up and talk to me. So getting into it, why printers? Well, in the world we live in today, it's not your grandmother's LaserJet 3 printer anymore. The printers that we see in the office environment are multi-function with full-featured operating systems that offer all the services you can imagine and all the features, and with that come all the vulnerabilities. A lot of people have looked into and researched this, and a lot of the talks I've seen in the documentation has been centered around the multi-function printers, laser printers, centered around companies like HP, Toshiba, Hacking Printers Wiki, the printer exploitation toolkit. There's a great talk from DEFCON 19, From Printer to Pwned, where the gentleman just sits there and goes through all the issues. Printers connected to the internet, or if you get on a corporate network, how you can leverage that to get credentials within the environment. Vulnerabilities like authentication bypass being the top of the list. These printers offer a lot of features. They have complex operating systems, but if anybody's tested any type of embedded system, you know that security take you back to the 90s with the level of issues you'll find in these devices compared to where it is in server and workstation environments. One individual actually, the Gizmodo article talks about an individual that wrote a script that went after the printers with default credentials and just printed out warning messages to basically, you have default credentials, your printer's on the internet, you're stupid. But why Zebra printers? And Zebra's a little bit different than these other multi-function printers, and I'll get into that. For me personally, how I even got into it was in 2014. So this has been a side project of mine wanting to do this talk for 4 years. I was actually tasked with a wireless penetration test of a distribution center. And part of that wireless assessment was these new printers that they wanted to connect to the network, so I had to test the security of them. And I spent a couple days with the devices, seeing how they connected to the network and what services they offered. And as part of that assessment, I was doing it for just a handful of days and was able to immediately demonstrate that these devices have huge security holes and able to overwrite the LCD screen on the front of the printer. So that's just one issue that we'll talk about and the potential risks associated with that. So the difference, I'm not going to read this, I don't expect you to read it, but this is from Zebra's website of what makes them different from those other printers in that there's no direct way to use the printer control language. Those printers use serial data that's sent to them. These printers, barcodes, QR codes. So the printing of those devices references XY coordinates. Page mode printing. So as I've highlighted these, some of these areas of this information, sequential data doesn't work that well. So we'll get into what Zebra has done for them to be able to print to these printers. The other thing is, it's tough getting the hardware to actually do your research. A lot of this stuff is expensive or just bulky. I'm not going to have 3 or 4 printers sitting in my home, especially those multi-function printers. But these devices are small, cheap to ship. At the time, in 2014, while I wasn't paying for the newer model that I tested at that warehouse, I did go with older models. And these are the ones you're mostly going to see at those rental car companies. Operating system's a little dated on these devices, but the features that they offer are still similar with the more modern printers that you see. So a mobile printer like this, and then down by my foot, a desktop printer, which you'll see in a lot of places, but most of the time they're hooked up to USB. Fortunately, a lot of those devices are connected directly to the internet. So I picked up a couple of those devices. In 2016, I finally got one of these, a smaller version of what I tested during that pen test. And then this year, again, I just happen to be aware of where these devices are when I'm just out in daily life. And I noticed a certain department chain had a lot of them now scattered throughout the store. And you'll see as we go on the safari to where these printers are located. So a little overview about Zebra printers themselves. I talked about that they're page mode printers, so XY coordinates, printing of barcodes. Zebra has its own programming language, ZPL. We'll also get into ZBI, the Zebra Basic Interpreter, which is a basic programming language to write executables to run on the printers. Nothing can go wrong with that, especially from an attacker's perspective. And then the other one, which I love, is the administration of the devices, the set, get, do printer commands. There's over 1,000 of those commands that manage all levels of the device, from how you're going to print to network controls to password settings. So on to a little more detail about ZPL and their language. And I can, as you see, mostly for printing barcodes and just managing how your labels are going to be printed when you use them. But you're also able to modify network settings. Restore default values. I have an example of that. I call that like the asshole command. The ability to upload files to the device. We'll get into definitely with detail with that. And changing passwords on the device itself. Now, all the things that I've seen when I've gone on these little safaris on the internet, none of those printers. Has anybody ever encountered an environment where they had a printer or some type of device similar to that where they actually changed the default password on it? I mean, I'm sure some organizations have it, but most of the time, it's still stuck at the defaults, which is 1, 2, 3, 4, by the way. Now, I'll touch on this a little more with regards to things I want to research in the future. With the ZBI, one, there's a learning level to go back and learn BASIC and play around with that and how they implement it on the devices. 2, you need a license on every printer. So there's a cost associated with that, with the research, and I did have a printer that had that, and that printer stopped working. So with relation to this talk, I wasn't able to fully take advantage of the ZBI, but there's definitely a lot of fun to have as I'll discuss at the end. So the SGD commands, able to do set any variable, retrieve any variable, get the information back, and then tell the printer to do certain functions. Like I said, there's over 1,000 of these commands use to manage their printers. One of them is interesting, is the IP netstat. So you can see what services are running, and I just have a screen capture of the services that are running by default on the printer. And the ones that we're going to talk about, HTTP, FTP, and the raw printer ports. We'll specifically have demonstrations associated with those, but they happily have Telnet available and JSON to communicate with the printer and manipulate any features, any of the settings on the printer. You can get around with any one of those ports to be able to do that. So a lot of services running on these printers. Full-featured operating system, lots of attack surface. So getting into these printers in the wild, first place you always like to go is Shodan. See what devices are out there, available. These are some query strings that I've put together, and that's based on the devices I have and just listening to the communication. The one that's the toughest to nail down actually is HTTP. But if you're able to take a look at the FTP query, you actually get, in this instance, 390 devices that come back. And most of them are the smaller desktop printers that I have right here. Even though that finds them listening on FTP, if you just click on the IP address, you'll find that pretty much all the other services are available as well, especially HTTP, where you're able to bring up an administrative interface to interact with the printer. So that's what the default looks like. It's on every printer that I've looked at is this really advanced web GUI. But it does allow you to view every file that's on the printer. And from perspective of identifying these devices from the internet, if you know these devices well enough, you can tell which ones have LCD screens based on the files that are available. It's the configuration files that set up the menus and set up what the buttons do on the devices. So if you see that, there's an attack surface right there that we're going to demonstrate later when it comes to physical security. Also, you're able, without authentication, to edit your own ZPL script. And as I mentioned before, ZPL, most of the time, this is set up so you can send labels directly to the printer to be printed. However, when it comes from an administrative perspective, change network settings, change password, upload files, be an asshole and reset the device remotely. So we'll demonstrate that. Google Dorks, these older devices, one of the options is a configuration page. So if that device had a domain name, it's indexed by Google. So there's a handful of those devices out there that are available. Here's a sample one and its sample configuration page. So where else can you find these devices, and how do you know which organizations use them? Well, one of the things I turn to is Twitter for Zebra Technologies, and they're happy to tell you the new companies that are using their products. So DHL, Hallmark, Lord & Taylor, Target, which I've actually seen myself, these mobile printers, they're a little bit larger. I've seen these actually used in the stores. This one I found interesting because it's a hospital system out of Kansas City, and I just thought they were nice enough when they included the screenshot to show the badge of the employee, which I thought that would be something that I would notify Zebra and maybe the medical company itself, but when I actually went and researched the medical company page, this was literally their website. So I mean, I just hope they're not wearing those badges when they go into surgery, because it looks like for the shot that they're all ready to go into surgery. Hello, infection lawsuit. Anyway, I digress. So as I said before, rental car companies, these are just images that I gathered through the years in preparation of this talk. So every time they got their handheld device, and that the RW420, the older model, I can't wait till they upgrade. Someday they will. So you'll see that at a bunch of places. This one was just sitting there just begging to be messed with. If it's not the RW420, there's a similar model, similar age, a QL320 Plus. I only show that image because if you want to get one of these real cheap on eBay, and you want a brand name on it, Walmart's offering them up. And these are all screenshots I captured yesterday to put in here. These are all for sale. So it looks like at some point Walmart surplused a lot of these older printers with their name on it. And that actually comes into play later on as we go into department stores where these are located. Discount grocery chain, they're using one of the older RW 420 models. Kroger, they got the QL 320 Plus. Marshall's upgraded. They actually use the same model that I pen tested in 2014. These are the ones with the more robust operating system and features. Ross, they're a little behind. They've got a QL 320 Plus. But my favorite one, and the reason this is the department store in 2018 when I saw these around, I'm like, man, this could be an issue. And that's Walmart. Because they have these devices everywhere. You can see the employees using them. Yeah, I noticed that. I noticed that they're here. Yeah. It's almost close enough to see what's on it. Now, this one is actually the interesting one in that when you go online and buy your groceries now and they shop for you and deliver them to your car, the carts that they use have a Zebra handheld and this Zebra printer. And when they're not in use, they're just set up in the back. And the interesting thing is Walmart's 24/7. So there is some interesting information to be found on the screen. I know from these devices, by looking at it, that they're connected to the wireless network. They're not using Bluetooth. You can see the IP address on the device. At this point, since this is recorded, I have to say that at no point in gathering any of these photos for any of this did I touch these printers. And I don't actually recommend anybody else doing that, because if you don't have the permission to do this, well, bad things can happen. So what do? Go on eBay. I buy ones from other companies to take a look at that they get rid of because they're broken. Well, I can fix them. This one's, the gray version it's their medical version. So these come from hospitals. Pre-op bay number 3, according to the sticker that they didn't remove from the bottom of it. Anybody ever bought anything off of eBay, any type of electronic device, and found it that they actually did wipe the information from it? Okay. So. So getting into these devices themselves and the network security. Now this is the part where we have a sacrifice to the demo guys. We're going to get into these actual devices and go over the protocols themselves and the fun things that you can do with them. So the first item I'm going to talk about is FTP. There's no authentication. Don't talk about the S. Don't worry about that. So yes, with these devices you can communicate anonymous connection FTP. And the purpose of this, the main purpose is you can send files directly to it. And they're immediately processed by the printer. So this ZPL commands, I assume you want to send stuff via FTP and have it printed. And that's one of the functions that you can do. Or you can send it just a text file with set, get, do commands in the proper formatting, and it will run those. And also the administrative functions with regard to using ZPL. So just by sending that file, that just printed something. I'm not going to mess with this printer because I'm going to use it for other fun things. I don't want to shut it down and turn it offline. We'll save some of that stuff for the physical security aspect. So that's usually by default is you send this information and it'll automatically process it. However, there's a set get do command that allows you to turn off the FTP execute. So in that case, you can drag files over. And the funny thing about this device, it has a web server on it, and it has an LCD screen interface that uses the wireless markup language in designing how the screen looks and how the buttons function. Now the wonderful thing is that if you send files over via this anonymous FTP, those files when they're written, and there's actually some of them already in storage, and these are actually the files that came with this device when I bought it off eBay, so they actually have their own custom menu, and it's the index WML. If I send my file over, it'll overwrite and become the default for that particular printer. And this is with regard to the LCD screen, doing any modifications, as well as the web server, which we'll get into. it overwrites the files. Anonymous FTP, there is only one device supported that supports a password on this for the FTP. Well, how do I get it so I can copy files over? Well, like I said, if you just send it ZPL commands or set get do commands, it'll just run them. So in this particular instance, I just have a text file with set get do, set variable ip.ftp.execute file off. Okay? Just send that over, and now it's not going to process any files anymore. It'll just store whatever I upload, which could be code if this printer supports and has a license file for the ZBI. You can upload code, and then you can modify the web server pages, the screen, so that you press any button and it'll do what you want. We'll get back to FTP in a second. HTTP is just as ugly. So this is the desktop device, and this is predominantly what I found while looking at Shodan. And this it really is a simple configuration environment. It's also an older machine, a little slow, so when I click, it takes a second. But I want to view and modify the printer settings. I'm connected to the internet. Nobody likes you. Do that. It's all right, we got multiple printers. It asked me for a password. Man, it is tough. Four digits too. I'd be afraid to brute force it by probably DOS the device, or just have it just print out paper. Oh man, my default password's not working. What can I do? Okay, let's see. Well, what other features do we have? I did show that you can see a directory listing of all the files on the device. In this particular printer, I'd sent over a ZPL file that's labeled Derbycon 8. It just prints out a nice Derbycon logo. But there's the create script function. And you can start to create. Okay. And you can bring up the edit screen. Now, there's a password box down here. That password is only required if you're going to save these files to the printer. And I mentioned, oh no, that's reset to defaults. If you want to be an asshole. Thank you. Yeah, the KP command for as I said, this is ZPL. ZPL can do a lot of things outside of just print labels. And like I said, you don't need a password. Let's try that one more time. Oh, wrong thing. So if you just print this label, it should happily queue it up for you. One of these will work. Label, okay. My label has been queued. Well. See if I can modify those printer settings now. And if this doesn't work, the answer is yes. I mean, the password's set to 5678 from the command that I ran. You can send this command over via FTP as well. You can send it directly via Netcat if port 9100 or port 9300 are available. Let's do that while we wait. So that's just proof. I'm just printing another label. demonstration. So let's print some more. Anybody want stickers at the end of this? Wow, access is granted. Okay. Most of the stuff you can do here is just mess with the printer, the calibration of the media. You can get into network configuration, more ZPL control. Not a lot of interesting things. But again, if these printers are connected to the outside internet, you can get the internal IP address. Just from a reconnaissance gathering standpoint, it's very helpful. So again, to reiterate, anonymous FTP can execute commands or upload files when they get overwritten, when they're put into the flash memory, take precedence over any default files or any previous files that were there. So these newer mobile printers, outside of this archaic interface that's on all models, they support server-side includes. And they all come with a sample page that prints out various information about the printer, including the IP status, wireless status, Bluetooth status. The interesting thing is, on this sample page, you have the ability to change 3 settings with regard to the display. And you can save those changes. Well, from just examining how this thing works, it just calls CGI scripts with the same names as set, get, do. So set var.cgi, get var.cgi. From looking at this, the actual code in this document, all of this information displayed in the tables is from accessing getvar.cgi, and the handful that allow you to change the settings is just from setvar. There is actually no authentication related to this in these pages, so a simple curl request to the setvar.cgi referencing one of those 1,000 set, get, do commands, and it'll be processed without any authentication. The other interesting is, well, how does the back-end code work on this? What are the different variables that are being used? The wonderful thing about communicating with these printers is being able to view the internal files by asking it. There is a set, get, do command that will just tell you, hey, this is what this file is. I just think I clicked the wrong button. Yep, I'm deleting the printer. Wonderful. Well, there's another fun thing about these printers. When I talked about the LCD screen, they're WML files. The main default one is index.wml. Once you obtain that one, you can see what other buttons, what other menus that they access. Because you want to get that information, because you want to modify it so when you upload it again, you can change it without them being aware of what the menu's doing. Maybe you press this button and it does what it's intended, but it also does what you want it to do. Well, this weird thing about these printers is, if you tell it, hey, I want to take a look at that file, it'll download it for you. And we have a directory listing of what files are available. So this particular device, unfortunately, you can't see the file extensions for some of these devices. There's other ways you can view it, but the top one up there is just config.sys. So, I mean, it's stored in a totally different directory than where, yeah. But maybe I want to look at that config.sys file. Okay, well, you can download it. Google won't let me unless yeah. So again, from the web directory, if you ask it nicely about other files from other file systems with regard to the files you have access to within this environment, you can download them so that you can view the code and manipulate it, and then maybe through FTP re-upload them, or as I'm about to show you, re-upload them through ZPL as we touch on physical security of these devices. So I quick showed netcat. Yep, if you just want to communicate any of those commands, just send it to it. It'll happily do it. No authentication. HTTP, just curl command to the CGIs that are available. Sure, I'll run those. FTP, just send it to me. I'll run it. This is in case all the demos failed, things that I was going to discuss. I touched on all of that. So the physical security, and this is really the meat of the talk and why I wanted to discuss this, because now I do see these printers everywhere, and there has been zero thought put into the security of these devices with regard to the services that are offered. As we all know, if you have physical access to the device, you already own it, as will display. Zebra is happy enough to provide an app for your phone. So when you're out, and I noticed going back to that screenshot as a hypothetical, those Walmart devices, they were connected to the wired network. They did not have Bluetooth turned on. Well, all these devices have a USB port on the side to interface and communicate with them, and they're happy to do that for you. So yes, you would need about a minute with these devices if you're doing a test. But once you plug it in, it immediately comes up. The app is immediately loaded for you. You just got to plug it into the printer. So now you're communicating with the printer. So the first thing I do is go to connectivity settings, go right to the Bluetooth, turn on Bluetooth, make it discoverable. Set minimum security, apply it, unplug. Done. Using the same app, go to Discover Printers. Do I want a pair? Yes, I do. One last piece of physical access you need? Yes, I accept.
You know, we are in, not unlike vampires.
See.
Maybe not like vampires, but we're definitely in to these devices. So, using a different third-party app called MobiPrint. I like this app because while you can get a lot of settings and manipulate the device like you actually want to use it like a printer, what I like is all the way down at the end is the option send a manual command. I will send a manual command. Look, a menu pops up that allows me to do any get, set, do on the device. So from a reconnaissance perspective, and these are nice, where you don't have to actually specify the exact command itself of one of the 1,000. If you just set the main item, say IP or device, there may be 100 dot whatever after it, but if you just specify just the one name, it'll give you all of it. Let me go back. When doing the device, it'll happily tell you the password. In this case, it's the default 1234. Super safe. That's interesting. Please come up, we can chat after. So, sending it IP, just get a net stat so you can see what other services are available on the device. But it really doesn't matter because using these commands, we can turn them all on if we want. Going back to the printer setup utility provided by Zebra, one of the other things that you can do is add a file. So you click the option Available Files, go to the directory, hey, I'm just going to add my ZPL file. In this particular case for this demonstration, I just called it WML because what I'm doing is, it's the ability to upload files. I'm uploading a file directly to it that's going to replace the main file on the LCD screen. You do have to reset the printer, but as demonstrated by this, in this particular case, it just set it to hello world. In this instance, send it a file. And I can print. Or if I want to overwrite, there's a function on these printers to print IP that they used. In this particular instance, when the file's done uploading, it'll do something else. So, before I get into continued research, just to rehash, because I do feel like it's an issue with regard to embedded device security in general, and in this particular instance, these Zebra printers, where there is no security in these devices. And I didn't add to this talk a section of, well, what can you do to better secure these devices? And I've been through Zebra's documentation, and their printer admin files to lock down these devices are just some set get do commands to disable some of these services. There's no secure, and add encryption. So that means you would upload a certificate file. I'm still communicating with it. Even though it's encrypted, I still have access to those interfaces that are poorly designed. And also, since I can do a directory listing, I can actually download those certificate files myself. And once you have the certificate files, where's the security? So I didn't add a section to these slides with regard to what you can do, because right now, I'm sorry, they do have great documentation on CIA, but that just applies to any type of risk management and not these devices themselves. So the interesting thing with regard to continued research is the irony is that my BlackBerry phone runs Android, but these mobile printers run BlackBerry. So there is a full-featured operating system under here, QNX Neutrino operating system, which is why it supports server-side includes now, because it has the Slinger web server that supports that. So talking about continued research, when I was manipulating some of those files, I can't run commands directly on this machine. Those are commented out if I try uploading them. The only thing I can do is get some see which one it is. I get some variable data once it loads. So we got a BlackBerry operating system. The firmware itself is a ZPL file, but I cannot figure out how it's encoded, encrypted, or compressed. You upgrade these devices. I've done it over USB. I've monitored the USB connection. It doesn't do anything on the FAT client itself before it sends it over. Everything's done on the device. So more research. I would love to be able to extract that information and actually get access to the file system itself. Other ways you can get access to the file system. All these devices have JTAG headers on them. The desktop one labels which pads you need to connect to. There's interesting headers on the QL N220 and the older RW420. But I've connected a JTAGulator to them and haven't gotten any signal back, so somebody with more knowledge than me take a look at the circuit board and see, okay, they remove this resistor here, or one needs to be added here, or something needs to be done to activate the JTAG interface, because it would be, again, interesting to get the file system right off the flash chip. I sadly talked about the printer that I was able to do ZBI on stopped working, so I was only going to buy one license. They're not as cheap. You just can't get those cheap on eBay. But just from the example files that Zebra offers, just from some of those samples, the potential from a research perspective and just from an attacker is fun. Especially the ones listed at the bottom, TCP communication, a UDP client, UDP server. So being able to upload a program on these devices that runs in the background to do the reconnaissance for you on the network and then send the information back out to you. For me, from an attacker's perspective, that would be the one that I would go after first. See if that web page loaded. Did not. Demo gods hate me. It was like half worked. The variables where I was able to get information back is the path for executables on the device, document root, and the executable root that the web server is running in. It's pretty standard. You probably could have guessed it. It's /zebra/bin, and then /zebraweb/ or zebra drive/e. The drive letters are known. There's Z, E, R, A, and B. So with that being said, we do have enough time for if there's any questions for me. Yes?
Have you noticed any way to get the printers to mirror what they're printing to somewhere else on the network?
I would love to look at that. And I've noticed with their commands, they're usually two separate commands. But I know that's definitely possible with ZBI. If something's printed, you can have it sent somewhere else. So if you want to capture information. The other interesting thing I didn't touch on, I'm glad you brought that question up with ZBI, is some of the things that they do use it for. Communication with a back-end database to get values and then print the labels. Or oftentimes they're used, you usually see those devices with the handheld barcode scanner. So you scan something, it processes it, prints a label, or plug it into a scale. But it is, I wouldn't say full feature programming language, we're talking about basic here, but you can do some ugly things with it. And if it actually is used in the environment, it has to be supported on the printer. They need a license key, but if it is supported, one, you have access to the files to see what they're doing, and you can manipulate that or upload your own. Oh. Yes?
Yeah, if you had physical access, have you found out how to get the credentials that you use for wireless?
That's a great question. So the question was, with physical access, can you get access to the credentials for wireless? And so far the answer is no. When any of those commands, and there are commands that ask for the password, all of the passwords, we're talking about Kerberos, wireless, it returns a single asterisk. So with the continued research, needing to get access to the operating system to get that information within the environment. Now, if you have something on the device that monitors changes, if they're setting up these devices or changing the password, I noticed in setting up the device myself, the password itself is encoded. So capturing that, we need to figure out a way to decrypt it. But I've noticed with the same password, it's always the same value. So it's encoded, it's not encrypted when it's sent over. Yes, I have a screenshot. I just didn't have enough time in the talk to talk about it. It is, yeah, it's an administrative interface. So yeah, you can do the same fun things. It's just so much easier over FTP and HTTP. Yes, you have to do a reset. Just for if you're messing with the LCD screen, if you overwrite the HTML files, you don't need to do a reset. That just happily works for you. So. Yes.
So you mentioned this was kind of some older printers and whatnot. Have you seen or know at all if companies looking more at security for printer devices?
No, and you know what? I worked with Experis. and they actually do work with a number of hardware and department stores, and I kept my eye open, and for some reason they use an Avery printer, so I wasn't able to. I would love to get with an organization and do enterprise level. It hasn't been since 2014 where I was actually working with an organization and how they configure the devices. So for me, it's all been personal research buying these devices online. As I said, I have not touched a single one of these at any of these other environments, though I'd love to. No, and I wasn't going to reach out to them until doing my research, and I found, from all this talk, the only real vulnerability that I see is the ability to reset the password from ZPL without providing a password. I think that needs to get fixed, and unfortunately, it may get fixed on these newer models, but the ones that, these have been out of support for a long time, but they're still in use everywhere, and it's the same issue. I would love to figure that out as well, since it's a ZPL file. I'd like, with some of the information that's on that screenshot, what is that? And from what I'm looking at it, and how I know how ZPL works, there's some CRC checks, but to upload files, if you specify all zeros, it just skips the check. So, again, bricking these devices though, I wouldn't know how to recover it if I messed with the firmware, but that is definitely interesting from a research perspective.
I assume you've already done like the low hanging fruit looking for easy command injection.
Yeah, everything that I've seen, and I'm not an expert like on the server side includes, especially with the Slinger web server stuff, but there is documentation on BlackBerry's website on it, and there's the ability in the web server to do that, but Zebra's done something on the system itself to where if I put that command in and I upload it, I literally can just view the